Hello, everyone. We will give folks just a couple more minutes to make sure that they're able to log on to the webinar. And then we'll go ahead and get started. When you log on, just for your information, you are muted. So if you have questions or would like to be involved in the conversation, by all means, just raise your hand or unmute yourself. Let me set it up before I forget so that I can go ahead and make sure that you're able to unmute yourself. So we'll just go ahead and give it another moment. We do have people that are still joining us. And while they are logging on, I am going to turn on my fan because it is quite warm, I've decided. One moment. Ah, the joys of doing webinars, right? So thank you all for joining us. I know that some of you may be growing very weary of only connecting with people via video, and I certainly appreciate and respect that, and really appreciate your time and interest in being involved in today's session. So just a couple of housekeeping things for those of you that don't know me. I'm Dr. Susan Meyerly, and I'm president of the Insight Employee Assistance Program. And we have really spent the day kind of talking with different representatives in the companies about some of the different challenges that they may be facing and really looking at that opportunity to continue to grow and kind of continue to function in an effective way while stress levels may be a little bit higher. So the way that this session is structured is, as I indicated, all of you are currently muted. You are more than welcome and invited to participate in the conversation at any point. Feel free to ask questions, share an experience, ask for clarification. I would like for this to be as interactive as possible. I do have some slides and information that we're going to be going through as a group. So hopefully you find at least one. My challenge is always with a group to find at least one takeaway that you can walk away with and begin to implement. So as you have questions, if you click, your microphone right now should be red with a line through it. If you click on your microphone, that should make it green, and then you can ask a question. You can also raise your hand, and I will certainly be able to call on you and ask questions in that way. So again, I invite you to be as involved as you can with today's topic. So one of the phrases that I really have been very interested in, let me see if I can back up here for a second, is this concept of growing through what you're going through. And I really like kind of that play on words. For those of you that know anything about me, I appreciate puns and plays on words. I think are great ways for us to really recall and have a concept resonate with us. So I didn't coin the phrase, it's just one that I really like. So really a part of what we're focusing on in this hour that we have together today is this idea of resilience. And one of the aspects of resilience is this idea that we all face challenges, and it's not about whether you fall down or whether bad things happen to you. It's really about resilience is about your opportunity to bounce back, and that's why I really love the Tigger quote: "Life is not about how fast you run or how high you climb, but how well you bounce." And one of the other pieces that I do like to integrate into many of the trainings that I do is that a little bit of playfulness and a little bit of humor. Hopefully you feel like it's appropriate humor. But I love the energy that Tigger actually conveys, and that idea of resilience as kind of getting things, getting back up and getting going after things have perhaps not gone as you would like for them to. And I think we would all most likely agree that we are currently going through things as we wish they were not occurring. I think that's probably an understatement. So resilience is really going to be the key topic that we're talking about today. And as important as it is to focus on what resilience is, it's also important to recognize what it's not. And one of the common misbeliefs about resilience is that it's a personality trait, and that it's just not something that I possess. And I really would encourage you to really look at resilience differently. Some of us may be more naturally inclined to being more resilient, just as some of us have a tendency to be more right-handed than left-hand dominant. We have different preferences, different experiences that become ingrained. And that opportunity to bounce back from resilience is quite honestly something that we learn ourselves, and certainly learn through mentors, and having that experience of, I'm so sorry, having that experience of evolving ourselves. And I love the images that are captured in the mind word display at the side. I can do it. I can do it mindset. I can learn. It's about becoming better. And this was borrowed, as you can see, there's references to teachers. This was actually borrowed from an elementary school class, not one that my kids are in currently or had been in, but it's really about, again, trying your best and continuing to be positive. And I recognize that certainly in today's environment, it can be really taxing to be very positive. And sometimes, quite honestly, it may not be appropriate to be positive. I'm not suggesting that we're looking at things through rose-colored glasses. That's probably one of the other things that I would add that resilience is not. But recognizing that, again, in the face of stress and trauma and things not going as we would like for them to, that mindset of moving forward, figuring out how we can be strong, how we can be helpful to other people, how we can support other people, how we need to be supported, are all part of those elements of resilience. There's also a quote that I really like about resilience. Goodness. And it's by Elizabeth Edwards. And I appreciate the idea that this is growing towards a new reality. So resilience is accepting your new reality, even if it's less good than the one you had before. You can fight it. You can do nothing but scream about what you've lost, or you can accept that and try to put something good, put together something that's good. And I heard another quote this morning. The concept was that you can nurse it, you can curse it, or you can change it. And I think sometimes we just need to recognize that there's a grieving process many times that is a part of being resilient. And part of that grieving process is, being frustrated that, gosh, things are not going as I would like for them to. This is hard, and I'm not suggesting that it's not hard. Please don't hear that in my message. Grieving and resilience are somewhat similar, because there's that disbelief stage. A lot of times people experience anger, that you can fight it kind of approach. You can scream about what you've lost. You can express that anger, which is very similar to the grieving phase. And at some point, then we begin to move towards acceptance and spend more and more time in acceptance. And that's really where our power lies, to do something different, to not continue to only be reactive to the environment and what's happening around us, but to really be proactive and setting those boundaries for ourselves. And maybe that's also part of setting our boundaries with people that are around us. We may say sometimes, depending on the relationship and our emotional closeness to someone, we may say, look, I really need to have some downtime to myself. Let's talk in an hour, or maybe even give me 5 minutes. And sometimes we may need to set that boundary with other people who, as my mom used to say, are negative Nellies, that we just need a little bit of distance. And I recognize that sometimes that negative Nelly may be us if we look in the mirror, and sometimes that may be a person that we're living with, and it's a little bit harder to set those boundaries with those people that are closer in our lives than that. But still, it's an important aspect for you to give some consideration to. Part of resilience is building connections. There's a couple of different ways that we work on building connections. One is to prioritize relationships such that you're spending time with people that are empathic and people that are understanding. And let me just be clear, when I talk about empathy or being empathetic, it's really about being with people who understand where you're coming from. And that sense that they don't have to agree with, but they may be able to relate to some of the experiences that you're describing. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Stephen Covey quote, seek first to understand and then be understood. And it's very encouraging for most of us to be with someone in a connected relationship where we feel like they get us. There are people, they understand what we're going through. And as I mentioned before, spending more time with those types of personalities rather than the negative Nellies might actually be a way for you to build some resilience and some of that bounce back for yourself. You may also decide that joining a group may be really helpful. I know there's been a, a tremendous influx in Facebook groups that have formed during the pandemic, and it's a way of people being connected with opportunities where we might not have had those connections before, or certainly maybe not the depth of those connections. So joining groups that are focused on positivity, focused on encouraging people, focused on self-care, all of those things can be very helpful. And again, if you're connected with a group, whether an informal or a formal group, that still can create that sense of building those connections. Another practice towards resilience is fostering wellness. So let me take 3 different aspects of fostering wellness and kind of break that down for you in just a bit. One is to take care of your body. And that really involves making sure that you're getting good sleep, that you're focusing on good nutrition. And that's not to say that you can't have that chocolate chip cookie once in a while or that second cup of coffee, but it's really about making sure that you're getting appropriate nutrition, that you're not skipping meals. And we have a tendency to engage in some really unhealthy physical habits when we get stressed. And each of us, I'm sure, can identify something that we do that we know is not really healthy for us, and yet we do it anyway. Meet mine, cup of coffee. Yes, that's my weakness. Um, and I know that at this point in the day in particular, I should be switching over to water, that's better for my overall health. And yet once in a while, we each need to have a little bit of our indulgence. But generally, taking care of our body involves sleeping, exercise, good nutrition, all of those physical care types of activities to the extent that we're capable. And I'm not suggesting that you become a marathon runner if you're not already interested in running. I always applaud those folks that are the marathoners in the group. I am not one of them. There are other ways that I try to take care of myself physically that don't involve running. So I pretty much appreciate that meme on Facebook that says, if you see me running, you should run too. That means someone's after us or something is after us. Along with taking care of your body is this focus on making sure that we're engaging in deep breathing exercises. One of the best strategies, albeit sometimes the simplest, to manage or to address anxiety is to focus on our breathing. And there's lots of different recommendations for how many counts of inhalation you should have and how many counts of exhalation. And what I have found is really, if you can push what's comfortable for you just slightly, that's a way of expanding that breathing practice into something that's more meaningful to you. And if you're someone that can engage in some really deep breathing, that's great. If you're new to the practice of focusing on your breathing and exhalation, then that's a process, that's a muscle that you build just like any of the other muscles that are in your body. And part of that breathing exercise can also be woven into this idea of mindfulness. And there's been, again, a lot of negative, I think, connotations of mindfulness as it relates to certain spiritual practices, perhaps that may not align with Christian perspectives. And let me suggest to you that mindfulness is really not exclusively tied to a spiritual practice. Mindfulness is a strategy to be present in the moment and a way to ground ourselves, and allow the anxiety to ease through our body, or allow whatever the intensity of that emotion may be to be something that we experience and release. The image that I often suggest when people experience those intense emotions is to picture being in an ocean, kind of on the edge of the water, where the water's about up to your ankles. And you really kind of need to adjust your feet in the sand so that as the waves come over you, you still stay standing. But the key piece to keep in mind is that when those waves come in, they also recede. And our negative emotions, or any of our emotions, quite honestly, are much like that. The intensity of the emotion comes in and then it recedes, as long as we don't experience resistance. And the more that we avoid something, the more energy that gets focused on it, and the bigger the wave, if you will. So, practicing mindfulness is a way of feeling very grounded in the moment, paying a special attention to different senses that are around you, whether it's aroma, whether it's sight, whether it's touch, and spending, I suggest that it's like putting something, that sensation, under a microscope, where that's really what you're focusing on, to the exclusion of all of that negative energy that's going on around you, whether it's outwardly in your environment or sometimes within our own minds. So it's that opportunity to, again, focus on taking care of our body with that breathing exercise, and then with the mindfulness of really that micro attention to one or several aspects of sensation that really, historically in research, has been found to be some of the most effective strategies in engaging in wellness practices. And of course, both of those practices are designed to help you avoid some of those negative outlets or negative choices that we make. Again, I recognize that we all have things that we do that are not the healthiest for us, and we just need to make sure that we monitor those. I will say, on my last cup of coffee for the day. It's okay. There can be a moment of grieving and silence for that. I recognize that that's a moment of silence, perhaps. Humor, by the way. Um, and I realize that if I want to sleep well tonight, then this needs to be my last cup of coffee. So there may be times when you say, okay, I'm going to allow myself to have this cookie because then I'm going to do this activity later, or it's a reward. Sometimes we use food or treats as rewards for a job well done, and that can be okay as long as it's not something that we do on a consistent basis. The other piece about avoiding negative outlets is making sure, as we were talking with connections, that you're around people that can lift you up. And all of you, I'm sure, can identify, I hope, someone in your life that can really lift your mood when you might be struggling. And so the idea behind fostering wellness is making sure that you're spending time with people that lift you up, and spending less time with those negative outlets, or negative Nellies, as my mom used to say. So I'd mentioned this idea of mindfulness, and I really like easy to remember things. And mindfulness is the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And I know that there's a lot of phrases at the end of that, paying attention, but it's really about non-judging. It's about, oh, look, there's that wave coming in and there's that wave releasing. So the acronym of RAIN is a great way to remember some of those mindfulness strategies. Recognize what's going on, accept the experience as it is. Doesn't mean you have to like it. Let me clarify that piece. It's accepting the experience as it is. Investigate the thought or emotion. It may say, I wonder, from that puzzled approach, I wonder what may be going on that's um, contributing to this thought or this emotion that I'm having. And then the N is about non-identification and recognizing that you are not the emotion. You experience emotions, and just like changing our thoughts, we can also change our emotions, but we are not our emotions. So it's that idea, again, of walking through each of those steps in the acronym. Here's what's going on. This is the experience that I'm having. I think, this may be contributing to it, and this too shall pass, as one of my previous mentors likes to say. And that N is again about that wave releasing that emotion washing over us and then being released. Part of our focus in resilience is being aligned and connected with our purpose. And for many of us, being aligned and connected with our purpose involves helping others. Not to the exclusion of self-care, mind you, but that focus on how does the work that we do benefit other people? And then being proactive, figuring out what are some different strategies that I can put in place that help me stay mindful of what my purpose is. And sometimes it may be post-it notes on your computer screen. It may be, we've seen lots of jewelry. I don't have anything on today that have words of inspiration, perhaps on necklaces or bracelets, or they can be visual reminders in our environment, in our office as well, whether it's our mission statement for our company or for our personal mission statement. All of those strategies, again, help us remain proactive and connected to that higher purpose that we feel like we serve. And then move towards your goals. Part of the challenge in this current environment is that there are lots of things that are pulling at our attention many times, and it's hard to know where to focus our energy and our attention. And my suggestion is to not get so connected to the one thing, but really focus on anything that will move you towards your goal. No matter how inconsequential it may seem, it's that whole idea of an object in motion tends to stay in motion. So if we start with something that um, you know is returning an email, for example, and that may not be the most important thing we need to do towards meeting our goals, but it's one step in the process. Responding to that email may help us then kind of gain some momentum and do other activities. And that's another way of staying connected to purpose. And the fourth strategy with finding purpose is to look for those opportunities for self-discovery. So we've often heard the inaccurate, quite honestly, symbol for crisis in Chinese is danger and opportunity. And what I would really encourage us to focus on is looking for that opportunity of self-discovery. What can I find out about myself, or what have I learned about myself as a result of what I'm currently experiencing? And how might I use that awareness, that knowledge that I've garnered about myself to continue to grow? And part of this also involves an element of grace. And sometimes it's easier to show a little bit more grace towards other people than it is towards ourselves. But it's very important that we give ourselves the opportunity to make mistakes, to be imperfect, and to learn from those experiences. Again, have that image, excuse me, have that image of Tigger in your mind, of bouncing back from whatever the action is that or emotion is that you've experienced, and say, okay, I wish I would have handled that differently, and I've given myself the grace to bounce back, and now I'm going to be doing something differently going forward in my interactions with that person, or as a result of that task that didn't quite go according to plan. Hopefully you can appreciate that experience. I'm pretty confident that more than one of us have had that experience as well. Another strategy in building resilience, words are hard for me apparently this afternoon, is to embrace those healthy thoughts. And I love, again, this imagery of our thoughts become words, which become our actions, which become our habits, which become our character, which become our destiny. And really, the idea behind engaging in healthy thoughts is to keep things in perspective. And sometimes when we get really frustrated and we have a tendency to become kind of fixated is the word that I would use on one particular thing and whether it goes according to plan or not, we need to kind of take a step back and look at that bigger picture and say, okay, in the whole scheme of things, how critical is this one piece? Now, sometimes it may be very critical, and other times you may be able to say, that's not as important and not as critical as I had thought it was. And that can give us, again, the grace and give us an opportunity to refocus our thoughts into something that's a little healthier for us. Now, one of the challenges that often people have when we look at unhealthy thoughts and healthy thoughts is this idea of accepting change. And for folks who really struggle with accepting change, this can be a really particularly difficult time because, as you all know, things seem to be changing on a daily basis, sometimes on an hourly basis, depending on the organization in which you work. And that continual change adds its own stress level. And this is where, if you're familiar with the Serenity Prayer that was really promoted through Alcoholics Anonymous, comes into play, and that whole idea of accepting things that we cannot change. And there are lots of things I wish I could change. Oh, believe me, the list is quite lengthy. And yet, what I have the influence over or the ability to change is much less. It always involves, what I can change always involves my own thinking. So when everything else seems very overwhelming and there's too much going on, we have the opportunity to really pay attention to the thoughts that are going on in our minds and the opportunity to change those thoughts into something that's more helpful and more nourishing for us. And again, when we look at this idea of our thoughts become words, sometimes it can be really helpful to write out the thoughts that are going through our minds, not so much because I want you to focus on those thoughts, but because seeing our thoughts on paper can give us an opportunity to change those thoughts into something more encouraging, something that's more helpful, and something that's more positive. It can also help us focus on, again, those areas that we can change. So we begin with our thoughts and then we focus on our actions. So if I'm thinking that I am capable and I'm confident and I can do this, that's going to influence the actions that I take. If my thoughts are more along the lines of I'm overwhelmed, there's too much going on, I can't do it all, then that influences our actions. And I've often shared the story of when my daughter was in fifth grade and she was struggling with fifth grade math. For those of you that had kids at home during the time that schools were closed, perhaps you can relate to math being one of those areas of struggle. And this image, this memory is so ingrained in my mind. She was sitting at our dining room table working on her math, and she's generally a straight A student, but for whatever reasons that evening was really struggling with math and just kept hitting a roadblock. And I would try to kind of coach her and kind of give her some direction, and that would actually seem to frustrate her. Sure, some of you can relate to that experience as well, the joys of parenting. And yet what I finally suggested that she consider doing was leaving her homework, going up to get ready for bed, again, taking that literally that step away from the work that she'd been doing, getting ready for bed, and then coming back and looking at those math problems with a fresh perspective. And she did that, went off, got ready for bed, and came back with this kind of more Eeyore rather than Tigger kind of approach, kind of, lumbering back to the table, clearly filled with dread that she still needed to complete her math assignment. And when she sat down and looked at the math problem, she was instantly surprised. She's like, "Oh, I know how to do this," and finished the problem. I kid you not. She had been working on, I'm going to be conservative and say at least a half an hour before I interrupted her and sent her to get ready for bed. She finished that problem in less than 5 minutes. I'm sure it wasn't even that long, quite honestly. But it's amazing how when we walk away and we come back with what my business coach suggests are soft eyes, we kind of look at things a little bit more gently, a little bit more as an observer rather than someone that's in it. Then we can really start to look at, I think I do know what I need to do here. And it's that fresh perspective and that recognition that we can change the thoughts that are going on in our minds that are just as powerful as the actual actions that follow. So part of embracing those healthy thoughts is also maintaining a hopeful outlook. And I know that that's really been difficult most recently for a lot of folks. There haven't been a whole lot of things sometimes to be very hopeful about. We certainly, when we look at the news stories, can become very discouraged by some of the headlines that seem to be coming up. And I encourage you, if you're a person that gets very overwhelmed by the news and by the headlines, I encourage you to give yourself a diet from the news. Now, just as when we're on a diet, we don't completely restrict something that we don't completely avoid cookies, for example. We may just only have one. Uh, Participating in the news is much like that. If you watch the news 24 hours, 7 days a week, it's going to most likely affect your outlook. Sometimes there are those positive news stories that also get plugged in, but sometimes the overall news and what's happening in the world or in the US or in our state or our community can be really pretty overwhelming and pretty um, really sap our hope, quite honestly. So I want to just recognize that it's sometimes hard if we're always consuming news. And I'm not suggesting that you not become aware or not stay aware what's going on, but that perhaps you put yourself on a diet where you watch 15 or 20 minutes of the news, or you watch the nightly news, or you watch local news, but that we're not watching constantly 24/7, because that can be very difficult for us to remain hopeful if that's the activity and the information that's influencing our thoughts and our minds. So it's okay to put yourself on a news diet so that you can maintain that hopeful outlook that um, we'll get through this. And we may not always know how, and we may not know what all will be asked of us in order to get through something that's very difficult, but that confidence that we're going to get through this. And that's part of that message that we keep hearing of we're all in this together. And I think it's really designed, that phrase is really designed to help us continue to remain hopeful that, all right, we'll get through this. We've been through some really tough things in the past, and we can get through this as well. And that's where that fourth bullet becomes so important, of making sure that we're learning from the past of, gosh, last week when I was really nervous or really anxious or really down, here's what I did that was helpful. Maybe that would be helpful for me now. And that's part of that learning from the past, not just his far back in history, like from previous pandemics or previous health crises or any of those kind of more historically remote things, but even learning from the past of, gosh, the last webinar I was on, here's what I did and here's what I didn't do, and so here's what I'm going to do differently going forward. or in my interaction that I had with this person yesterday, this piece didn't go so well. So note to self, when I engage with that person going forward, then I may approach them a little bit differently. Gosh, they seemed really overwhelmed yesterday, and I added to, with a task, an assignment that I gave them, I added to that sense of feeling overwhelmed for them perhaps. So today, maybe I need to just check with them and say, hey, how are you doing? There's a lot going on. How can I support you? How can I be helpful to you? So that's also part of learning from the past. Again, for those of you that know much about me, you also know that I appreciate humor. And humor is one of those aspects of resilience. And I love the two quotes that are on the screen. I couldn't resist. Life is better when you're laughing. It's actually Irma Bonbeck quote. And um, I have many of her books that I like to read that make me laugh, that add that humor. And again, I go back to my coffee cup. I don't know how well it shows up on the screen, but it's the word laugh written in lots of different fonts. And it's that reminder that laughter is a great way to do a reset of our emotions, as long as it's appropriate laughter. And I always emphasize appropriate laughter, because you know as well as I do, there are some times that laughter is not considered appropriate, or I dare say flat out wrong. And there are times when laughter is a great way of relieving stress and anxiety. And as Milton Berle had once said, laughter is an instant vacation. By the way, for those of you that don't feel like that you laugh as much as you would like to, I'm sure you've probably heard the statistic that 2 and 3 year olds laugh like 42 times a day, I think it is, and adults we laugh about 3. And certainly when things are more stressful, perhaps we don't even laugh 3 times a day. And yet, interestingly enough, our brain doesn't physiologically know the difference between true, genuine laughter and creating laughter within ourselves. And what I mean by that is sometimes it's okay to just pretend to laugh as if we're pretending that something is funny. And there's lots of different resources that I use to create that sense of laughter. There's actually a really funny clip that was from a TV show with Jeff Foxworthy, I believe it was, where one of his guests just has a laughter that's just hysterical, and even thinking about it obviously brings a smile to my face. I can just hear that laugh and start smiling. And so you may have some resources like that. When I first became a counselor, this is kind of pulling the curtain back and airing some of the counselor dirty laundry, if you will. But I'm often asked how I listen to people's problems all day long. And I tell you, I feel so blessed and fortunate to be able to work with people. It's what gets me energized every day, and it's what I dearly love to do. Early in my career, though, I needed to figure out some strategies so that people's emotions didn't become my emotions, so that I wasn't taking on the weight of the world. And for those of you that are very empathetic and like to help, we have a tendency to take on the emotions kind of like a sponge of the people that are around us. And sometimes that's not always very healthy for us. So when I started working as a counselor, I had a small notebook that I kept where I would cut out cartoons or jokes or things like that that were entertaining and funny and that would make me laugh. And again, laughter is a great way of releasing that tension. It shifts the endorphins that are in our mind and can help us be much more positive and much more focused on the tasks that are before us. So it's a great emotional reset when it's as someone said, when it's dosed appropriately. And I appreciated that description with humor as well. I've included in this slide, I apologize, it looks very busy, I realize, but there's a resilience scale that you might find very helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and describe the scale a little bit, but I would encourage you to pull out a piece of paper and just number 1 through 14 and rate yourself on each of these 14 areas. Now, often one of the questions that we get asked is, will we have copies to the slides when the presentation is over? And you certainly will. I will email that copy of the PowerPoint out to you. You can also download it in the handouts tab on the GoToMeeting control panel if you'd like more immediate access to the PowerPoint presentations and the slide in particular. I know sometimes people have even held up their phone and taking a photo, and that's fine too. But this resilience scale is a way of helping you identify where you're strong in resilience and where you have an opportunity for growth. So as we look through these questions, I usually manage one way or another. I feel proud that I've accomplished things in my life. We know, again, that when we have that sense of accomplishment, that also adds to our belief in ourselves and what we can accomplish in our resiliency. I usually take things in stride. And by the way, if you have more scores that are in that strongly disagree, like I'd mentioned to you before, resilience is not something that some of us are born with. It's something that we learn. So as we go through this information, you may say, if I don't feel like I take things in stride, if that's in the 1, 2, 3 strongly disagree category, that may be something that I want to focus on. I wouldn't encourage you to focus on all 14 because that can be overwhelming. But if you pick one of those and say, okay, what would it look like if I were taking things in stride? What's one thing that I might do differently or begin to give some consideration to? Because we know sometimes we have to be able to envision in our mind so that we can create the experience. Number 4, I'm friends with myself. 5, I feel like I can handle many things at a time. And again, don't overthink your answers. Kind of go for that gut response, if you will. I am determined is question number 6. I can get through difficult times because I've experienced difficulty before. Number 8 is I have self-discipline. Maybe not 100% of the time, but where would you describe yourself as having self-discipline? Are there certain areas of your life, perhaps, where you're more disciplined than others? I have a tendency to be very disciplined about the time that I go to sleep because I recognize from reading plethora of research studies that making sure I get adequate sleep is so critical for me. So I'm more disciplined there than I am, in other aspects of my life. So, you might even break that question down a little bit further. Number 9, I keep interested in things or I find things interesting. Number 10, I can usually find something to laugh about. And again, we can build that laughter muscle. We can focus on what is it that we find funny and pull more opportunities for humor into our life. Number 11, my belief in myself gets me through hard times. Number 12, in an emergency, I'm someone people can generally rely on. Number 13, my life has meaning. We had talked about that sense of purpose earlier in today's webinar. And number 14, when I'm in a difficult situation, I can usually find my way out of it. So I would encourage you just to do a visual picture. Obviously, you can do a sum total of your response. And if you have a tendency to be in that category of strongly, 5s or above, then that's an indication that you're pretty strongly resilient. If you have some 1s and 2s and 3s, again, that may give you an idea of where you can focus on becoming more resilient. And maybe it's changing your self-talk, or maybe it's changing the interactions that you have with the people that are around you. And you get to decide, obviously, in which of those areas you might like to focus and find most helpful for you. And then, of course, I need to conclude with a cartoon of promoting resiliency in others and give warmth, be positive. I can learn this, listen well, talk and smile. All of those are great ways for us to be able to promote resiliency and part of that belief in others. So I did want to make sure this concludes the formal part of the presentation, and I did want to make sure that we allowed some time at the end for questions and conversations. What resonated with you? Is there an idea that you think you might begin to implement for yourself? And so I'd invite you to unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about what spoke to you. What might you already be doing that you didn't realize was adding to your resilience? Just checking the chat and questions. Want to make sure that people have the option to communicate in whatever way is most comfortable. But if you want to go ahead and click your microphone, once it turns green, that means that you're not muted. So I'm curious to hear what you currently do to help yourself really promote resilience. You can go ahead and raise your hand if you're having any difficulty unmuting yourself. I know someone in a webinar earlier today did not seem to be working very smoothly. And you don't need to share your video and webcam unless you would like to. I would love to see smiling faces. But you can certainly just go ahead and mute yourself if you'd like to share something with the group about what you do to help promote resilience within yourself. Bueller, anyone there? Bueller? Sorry. Comedic flashback. So just to make sure that things are working correctly, can someone go ahead and unmute themselves? I just want to make sure that the technology is working as it should. You can just say hi. I want to know that someone's
Hi.
there. Thank you, Rachel. So would you be willing to share something that helps you feel resilient and feel like you can make it through?
I just think going out there and having the time and spending the time with the residents that we can right now, you know, in the ways that we can, and having fun with the team members and having like dress up days and theme weeks and all that kind of stuff. You know, the smiles, like you mentioned, the laughter and everything. That's kind of what gets us through.
And I appreciate that creativity sometimes that comes through crisis. That's one of the quotes that I really love is that we become very creative when we're faced with crisis, and things that we might not normally do now seem to be a great idea. And it's a great way of kind of building that culture of connection and helping people feel like they're cared about as well. Awesome. Brenda, let's see if I can, see, you had your hand raised. You want to go ahead and talk? I think you are unmuted. Hmm. Oh, Brenda, I show that you're not connected to audio. I'm not sure what happened there. Do you want to type a question in either the question box or in the chat? I'm not sure if you're connected through your phone or through the internet, but I would love to ask or answer your question. All right, so let me ask a different question that perhaps you can give some consideration to and might be comfortable sharing in the group. And that is if there's one aspect that's going to help you kind of manage stress effectively and that you're looking forward to engaging in at some point this evening after we're finished with the webinar, what might that be? What do you think is something positive that you're looking forward to that helps you continue to feel energetic? Go ahead, Lori. Hmm. Lori, I see that your microphone is unmuted, but we are not able to hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
So I exercise, I walk, try to run a little bit. I try to do it every night. It's my alone time. I don't know, it helps me. I'm very dedicated to it, and it's been mainly just through this whole COVID thing that I've really gotten started to doing that. So, um, my husband and son know that that's what I'm going to do every night. So that's just kind of my own self-care.
So that's part of the practice that you engage in when you leave work, and they recognize that when mom comes home that she needs her time and we'll connect with her after she's finished, right?
That's right.
Awesome. I'm so envious. I wish I was a runner. I hear a lot of good benefits from that, but I'm going to probably be one of those folks who engages in a different activity. Um, Walking I can do, running not so much. So my hat's always off to folks that are runners in the group. So Brenda asked the question of she's a social worker, so how do I keep a distance so I don't get so attached? Oh my goodness, sometimes that can be really hard if we're one of those empathetic, caring kinds of folks. And I think to be less connected, less attached, sometimes feel like we are removing a part of ourselves, and I don't know that that's necessarily the best approach. I think figuring out how to manage that attachment so that it's helpful for the person that you care about and it's also helpful for you. And part of that is looking at how can I support them, or how do they support me, and what's the value of this relationship, and really appreciating the richness in those interactions, and recognizing that just like sometimes the challenging times pass, the hard part is sometimes those good times don't last as long as we would like for them to either. And that's again part of that wave imagery that I had described earlier, where then the negative emotions can wash over us and go out to sea. But on the flip side, those positive emotions often have that experience as well. We try to hold on to those positive emotions, obviously, as long as we can, and yet the water still recedes and that positivity still um, uh, goes away for a little bit. It's like I don't know if you're familiar with the question that was asked about motivation. It's the whole idea that we need daily motivation just as we need that daily shower, that it doesn't stick with us. It's a continual practice. So engaging in self-care, maintaining those boundaries, expressing gratitude, staying connected to our purpose, all of those things help keep us going in both, as the cliche saying goes, in both the good times and the bad. And so I appreciate you asking that question. Other questions or feedback that people would like to share? Anyone else want to share one thing that they might be engaged in this evening after we're finished? Someone other than my healthy runner, or in addition to my healthy runners in the group? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, I thank you all for your participation in this webinar. I hope there's something that you are able to glean from the information that we talked about, that and maybe it's just a reminder of something that you already knew. I don't want to pretend like this is rocket science, because rocket science implies that you've spent years researching and learning something and that only a few select can do it. This is really available to all of us. These are tools that all of us can do and maybe have been doing to varying degrees. So it may be about implementing more subtle changes into our daily practice that might be the most helpful for us. So I appreciate and honor the work that you're doing. I appreciate you being on the call or the session today. And I just want to do a quick reminder that, oops, that we're here for you. One of the other strategies that you can use in increasing your resilience is to get help. And that doesn't necessarily mean talking to a counselor. We certainly have coaches that you can work with that, again, depending on the issue that you want to address, will help give you some feedback and some skills to be able to grow into whatever changes that you're looking at making. So it's that shameless plug at the end to remember to call us, that we're here for you. We actually are available 24/7 if you need something, or if one of your team members needs something in the middle of the night, that they can reach out to us as well. We are currently doing the majority of the counseling sessions via video or phone, depending on people's internet capabilities and accessibility. So if people don't feel comfortable coming into the office, we can still provide that service for them. And we anticipate that that's going to continue. We were doing that prior to actually the beginning of this year. We started providing video sessions last year. So that's just a part of our standard practice, and one of the other ways that we provide services to employees and their family members. So thank you all for being on today's session. Again, I appreciate your dedication to the work that you're doing, and would remind you that we are here to help you. And if there's a need that you have, don't hesitate to reach out. Have a great evening, everyone, and thank you.